Okay, we are starting our history of Pirkei Avos, the backstory behind all that was going on in Pirkei Avos, and this is now episode 2. Okay, once again I want to remind everybody that this year's learning we are dedicating to the memory and Aliyas HaNeshama of my mother-in-law, Peltegisha Bas Avram Yitzchak. Her neshama is having Aliyah, Chaim Lebracha. Chaim. Again, we want to thank Tani and Khanchi for hosting the class. We'll begin. Now, last week we basically ended off with, we talked all about the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, Ezra, and Nehemiah, and the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. And we finished with the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah and the Takanos of Ezra, all of the edicts that Ezra had implemented, as well as all of the Takanos, all of the edicts that the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah did, and how the system and structure that they set up is primarily the very same Yiddishkeit and Judaism that we keep today. The customs of davening and going to shul and reading of the Torah and so many more things. Now, I want to go back in time just for a drop. I want to talk for a moment about the Samaritans. Okay? You see, hold on a second. Do I have the right? Here we go. What?
The good ones?
Not the good ones. No. Okay. We talked a little bit about the Samaritans last time, but it's important to really have an understanding of who they were, because they do play somewhat of a role. So, their origin is as follows. They were known as the Kuthians, or Kusim, not Kushim, that's from Africa, but Kusim. The Mishnah talks about if so-and-so did this, if a Kusi did this, then that means a Samaritan. Where'd they come from? When Sancheiriv Melech Ashur, Sancheiriv, who was the king of the Assyrians, when he invaded and conquered Israel, and he exiled the 10 tribes, he decided that he was going to repopulate the land. He had driven everyone out, and he decided to repopulate the land. And he did this by importing a population. This is sounding awfully familiar. And they even came in from the southern border? No. So, he brought in these Kuthians, this group, these people, and he settled them. And the primary area where they settled was an area known as Shomron, or Samaria. And that's how ultimately they took on the name, being the Samaritans. But for example, as I said in Mishnah, when it talks about, refers to those people, it still refers to them as a person like that, as a Kusi. Anyway, this group that was brought, they were idol worshippers. That's who and what they were. And when they came in and they settled the land, Hashem sent, so to speak, a plague, but he sent lions to go and invade. And the lions came in and were decimating them. And they, out of fear for these lions that were decimating them, they decided that they would worship God instead of being idol worshippers. They decided to worship God, and not only that, they decided that they wanted to actually convert to Judaism. And so they converted. They sort of converted. In certain areas, they were extremely meticulous and strict in their Yiddishkeit. And in other areas, they were somewhat less strict. And in other areas, they were completely non-compliant whatsoever. And this situation caused a great deal of confusion. What are they? What's their status? And there was a debate, and the rabbis of the Talmud debated, what are they? Are they actually Jews? Are they not Jews? And as I said, you can look in the Mishnah and it says, well, what if this was done by a Kusi, or this was seen by, and different things, and what's the halacha? And there are sometimes when it's considered okay, sometimes when it's not. Ultimately, when they first came, and they were first living there, when the Jewish people came back to Israel for the first time, when King Cyrus, Koresh, allowed them in to start rebuilding the second Beis HaMikdash, so they were very concerned. They said, wait a minute, the Jews are coming back, they're going to come take our land, they're going to throw us out. So they devised an evil plan. And their evil plan was that they would help the Jewish people build the Beis HaMikdash, and while helping, they would sabotage the program. So they offered their help. The Jews who had come back with Zerubbabel, etc., were not interested in whatever it is that they had to sell. They didn't take cold calls. And they decided that they're not going to go along with it. And they said, thanks, but no thanks. And they rejected their offer. And this offended them very greatly. You rejected our offer. What do you mean, your offer? But nonetheless, they were very, very concerned and they were offended. And this caused a great deal of hatred between them and the Jewish people. Their response to that was another way of dealing with the Jews. And what they did was, I mentioned this last week, they started to appeal to Achashverosh. And they basically got word to Achashverosh that the plan of the Jewish people, this whole building of the Beis HaMikdash, is a launching board, it's a launching pad for them to launch a full-on rebellion, leave the Persian Empire, and create independence within Israel, so that it won't be under the Persian Empire anymore. And when Achashverosh heard this, he believed it, and that's why Achashverosh suspended the building of the second Beis HaMikdash. Mm-hmm. As we know, ultimately, after Achashverosh died, his son Daryavesh II did allow them to finish the Beis HaMikdash, and they completed it. So that's, in a nutshell, who they are, who they were. In the end, as we'll find out later as we go through more parts of history today, in the end, they were ultimately considered to be, they were found many, many years later to be worshipping idols on a regular basis, and the rabbis of the Talmud officially declared them to be Gentiles, not Jews, and not considered Jews. There is, to this day, a very small group of Samaritans that still exist. Kufians, Samaritans, whatever they call themselves. Where they settled, they originally settled in Samaria, and specifically they settled in Shechem and Har Grizim, and we'll learn soon about how the fact that they built their own, so to speak, Beis HaMikdash, they built their own temple on Har Grizim. And they still exist. In the book Our People, you know what? Let me grab that. Hold on. I said to myself, well, I need the book. I didn't even refer to it once last week. Yeah. If you look online, you can see pictures of them even today. But in the book Our People, this book was published in the 40s, if I'm not mistaken. In the late 40s, it shows that at that time that there were still a group of about 300 Samaritans that still existed. And it's interesting, you see, I'm going to show you this picture. It's
when the book was written.
Does it make sense? They still use the Old Hebrew?
They still use a certain Old Hebrew Ksav. They never accepted the Ksav Ashuri. They never accepted the Ksav Ashuri that the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah did. They have scrolls that they consider to be their Torah scrolls, but they have differences. Because they manipulate the text to make them out to be the real chosen people. They have references to Har Grizim, many references to Har Grizim that aren't really there. But I'll pass around here. I'll put it up here. Look at that. Think I'm holding it long enough for everyone to see? Mm-hmm. No, but I'll pass it around. This is a picture from, again, whatever year this book was published, which, if I'm not mistaken, was this one was in 1964, but I think the original was way earlier than that. And here it shows that even then, just listen to what it says. It's an interesting thing. The caption. Of the once powerful and troublesome Samaritans, only a small sect of 300 members now remains. They believe only in the 5 books of Moses. Shown on the picture are Samaritan priests displaying ancient scrolls, it says here, of the Torah. Technically, it's not Torah. In their synagogue at Nablus. Nablus is Shechem. It says, now in the Arab kingdom of Jordan. Because when this book was printed, it's after 1948. And the area of Shechem was part of Jordan. Okay? Which is why the Palestinians want their land back from... never mind. Okay. Anyway, just take a quick look. It's interesting. It looks like it's very similar to like a Sephardic Torah or something. Anyway, moving on. One other... As I said, we ended off at the end of Ezra. Okay? Now, Ezra died in the year 3448. Everybody has your... can I have one of those timelines also? It would be helpful behind you. Okay. Thank you. There you go. So, Ezra died in the year 3448, which again would be corresponding to 313 BCE.
This is a Samaritan mezuzah.
Yeah. Interesting.
They write it on the walls.
Oh, they write it on the wall. They write it on the wall.
That's what it says.
Oh, it's on the wall.
So
Yeah.
you see.
Right. They don't believe in any Torah Shabbat Peh. Well, like many other different groups, except that the other groups that didn't believe in Torah Shabbat Peh were Jews who had strayed, whereas this group never really became Jews in the first place. We talked about Nehemiah. How Nehemiah had come in. He built the wall in 7 weeks. He built the wall around Yerushalayim in 7 weeks. And all that he did, and Nehemiah and Ezra together really worked hard at strengthening the Jewish community, bringing them back to their roots, and bringing them back to Yiddishkeit, and to the strength of their spirituality, and living a religious, observant lifestyle. Ultimately, in the year 3438, so that's, Nehemiah first came in the year 3426. So that's 12 years, right? 12 years later, Nehemiah was recalled to Shushan. The emperor called him back and said, we need you here. Nehemiah was a very valuable advisor, and he said, I need you here. So he went back to Shushan. When he left, there was a real, even though there was already Ezra, and there was already the Anshe Knesset Agdela, somehow, in his absence, things went bad. And many of the Jewish people started again to stray and started to diminish in their observance. The kicker of it all was in the Beis HaMikdash itself. There was a Menashe who I believe Menashe himself was the Kohen Gadol. He was certainly a descendant of the Kohen Gadol who had come in with Zerubbabel. And Menashe went and married a Samaritan. And not just a Samaritan, but the leader of the Samaritans, of the Kusim, his name was Sanballat. And he gave his daughter to Menashe to marry. And there in the Beis HaMikdash, I mean, stuff that was going on over there was horrendous. It's a brand new Beis HaMikdash, and they're doing all these bad, crazy things under the leadership of this Menashe. Others went ahead and married Samaritan wives as well, and there was suddenly open Chil Shabbos. They were desecrating the Shabbos, and they were going ahead and doing business on the streets in Shabbos, and it turned into a very bad scene. When Nehemiah heard this, he pleaded with the king of Persia, and he said, please, I beg you, you got to let me go back. I got to make things right over there. And he allowed him to return. So Nehemiah returned, and this was actually I think it was Nehemiah's third time coming. I think he may have originally come with Zerubbabel, but this was his, if I'm not mistaken, his third time coming back. And what he did was he laid down the law. And with a combination of laying down the law and preaching and inspiring, etc., he expelled Menashe from the Beis HaMikdash and all that was associated with him. And basically, he made new laws. He made laws that nobody can do business on Shabbos in Yerushalayim. Even non-Jews are not allowed to do business on Shabbos in Yerushalayim. To see to it that there's a proper Shabbos environment in Yerushalayim. And he banished the Samaritans from anything within the general Jewish faith and Jewish fold. They still considered themselves, there was still the argument, are they or aren't they, but they were no longer included in any of the service or anything to be accepted as real people. They kind of gave up on being accepted at this point, and they retreated back to Shechem, and that was when they decided to build their own Beis HaMikdash. They're not going to be able to make it in the Beis HaMikdash here, and they built their own temple on Har Gerizim, which will come into play a little bit later. We mentioned that Malachi died, and Nevuah was now over. It was no longer prophecy. And the books of Tanakh, all of the books of Tanakh were sealed and canonized, and that was it. Nothing else could ever again be added to Tanakh. It could be other things, but it wouldn't be part of Tanakh. The last remaining member of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah was Shimon HaTzadik. Simon the Just. He's the last member of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. He is the bridge between the times of prophecy, because technically Ezra is still the time of prophecy. Ezra is still biblical times, right? Ezra is biblical, part of Tanakh. Shimon HaTzadik is not. Shimon HaTzadik is officially called the Tana, one of the great teachers of the times of the Mishnah. So he's the first of the Tanoim. Shimon HaTzadik was also a Kohen Gadol. He was, according to most, he was a Kohen Gadol for 40 years. As the Kohen Gadol, at that point, the Kohen Gadol was the primary leader of the Jewish people. He was the spiritual leader, and he was the material leader, and he was the political leader. He was the all-encompassing leader of the Jewish people, because there was no king at the time. There was no political body at the time, really. So it was all the Kohen Gadol. Everything fell on him, and that was the power and leadership that he had. He was considered to be the greatest and holiest Kohen Gadol of all of the 420 years of the second Beis HaMikdash. Nobody came to his level. There were 5 specific miracles that happened during the times of Shimon HaTzadik. And there was, every year when they did the service on Yom Kippur, there was the string, right? And there was the red string, and if after the service was done and they sent the scapegoat off the cliff, if the Jewish people were forgiven, then the string would turn to white. Throughout all 40 years of his tenure as Kohen Gadol, the string always turned to white. There was another issue, which was that they would do a girl. We just read about this last week in Akaremes, right? Girl echad laHashem, the girl echad laAzazel. They would draw lots, and one lot would come out, and that would be for Hashem, and that goat would go to be offered in the Beis HaMikdash. The other one was laAzazel, that it would go off into the wilderness, and that's where it would be chased off a cliff. All 40 years of his tenure, the lot, the girl that came out saying laHashem, as he put both hands in, was in his right hand. So by the way, in year 34, if you wanted to bet, the odds in Vegas at that time were pretty heavy toward it's going to happen. You know that statistically, if you flip a coin 99 times and it lands on heads 99 times, do you know what the odds are when you flip it the 100th time that it's going to land on heads?
Exactly
50-50. After 99 times, the odds are still 50-50. Oddly enough. Having said that, the Kohen Gadol year after year after year, no matter what side bets they may have done, it was always, all 40 years of his tenure, the Geirel, the lot of laHashem, came in his right hand. That was another of the miracles. Another miracle was that the oil in the last lamp, in the western lamp of the menorah, they would put in enough oil to last. But then when it would burn out, they light it again the next night. The last one always burned for a full 24 hours. It was always still lit when they relit the menorah next. And that was also only during his time. The lechem hapanim, the showbread that the kohanim used to eat, that was kept on the shulchan, on the golden table, wasn't that big. And it would be split amongst a lot of kohanim. There was every time that it was served, every kohen always felt satiated by it, in spite of how small the portion may have been. And finally, the fire on the mizbeach always stayed steady, even when they ran out of wood. Till they added the next wood, somehow the fire didn't diminish and didn't trickle out. The fire always remained steady, and throughout its entire 40 years. Those were the miracles. After his passing, that stopped. All of those miracles didn't continue after his passing. Now, there are other things that Shimon HaTzadik was famous for. He was famous for traveling the country and teaching and inspiring. He didn't just stay in the Beis HaMikdash. He did his job. He was a bit of a shliach. Okay, he was a shliach. He was out there and he was reaching out to Jews, teaching them Torah, and not just teaching them but also inspiring them.
That's Rabbi Shimon in the Tana?
Shimon HaTzadik.
That's Rabbi Shimon. Tana.
No, it's not Rabbi Shimon in the Tana. No, it's not. When it says Rabbi Shimon, that's usually Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's many generations later. This is in the Pirkei Avos, Mishnah Beis of Pirkei Avos is Shimon HaTzadik Haya Mishari Knesset HaGdolah. Shimon HaTzadik was the last remaining of the Knesset HaGdolah. Okay.
Before they gave the name Rebbe. Rebbe is lower than the plain name.
Okay. And then it says Hu Haya Omer. He used to say Al Shlosha Dvarim Ha'olam Omed. The world stands on 3 pillars. Al HaTorah, V'al Avodah, V'al Gemilas Chasadim. Right. The world stands on Torah, service of God, and acts of kindness. That's what the world stands on. That's Shimon HaTzadik. That's who we're talking about now. Okay, so again, we are doing the backstory of Pirkei Avot. So far, with all that we've told, we're up to Mishnah Beis in Perek Aleph. Okay. Another thing that he did was he established schools to ensure education for every Jewish child. It's mamish sounding like a shliach, huh? And this was of vital importance because with all of the weakening and diminishing that had taken place between the years leading up to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the Golus, the re-entry into Israel with the difficulties in the times of Ezra and Nehemiah twice, it was vital to get an education to every child so that the future of Judaism would be one with knowledge to be able to continue to pass it on. He pushed older students not to quit and go to work, but to advance in their studies. He was very into that. He fortified. He didn't only worry about the spirituality. He worried about the physical and material well-being of the Jewish people. He fortified the walls of Yerushalayim and fortified the Beis Hamikdash. What he's very famous for was, in his leadership, was the famous meeting with Alexander the Great. Mm-hmm. Now, the Gemara tells the story. I believe in more than one place the Gemara tells the story. And the Gemara says as follows. For starters, there was an annual tribute or tax that they would pay to the governing body, the governing empire. The governing empire at that time was Persia. They were under the Persian Empire, right? It was the Persian Empire that allowed them to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. They even, as we mentioned last week, had the mural of the city of Shushan at the entrance to the Beis Hamikdash in tribute to them. And they also paid them a hefty tax every year. Alexander the Great arose. And by the way, either at the end of this week or maybe next week I'm going to do it, just to take a sidebar. There's a book called Seder Hadores, okay, written by Rav Halperin in the 1700s maybe? 1800s? I got to look it up when he wrote it. And this is considered one of the most authoritative works of Jewish history. And he has everything, and he dates everything, and it's really interesting. So he goes through a lot of stuff, including the birth of Shimon HaTzadik and the birth of Alexander the Great. And as I said, some of the stuff may not coincide exactly with secular dating. And there's a lot of reason for that, which we're not going to deal with right now. We're just going to accept these as authoritative, seeing as this is who we are. And there's a lot of reason to be able to accept the tremendous Masorah handing down, as well as the tremendous research done by Jewish scholars when it comes to the writing of Sfarim. Anyway, so Alexander the Great rose to power. By the time he was, 19, 20 years old, he was it. Okay, this guy was a young whippersnapper who really had a lot of guts and a lot of courage and, had not a lot of humility. And he was out there conquering the world. And he went from Macedonia, which is in the area of Greece. He went from there and he conquered Turkey. He came across from Greece across through Turkey into Syria and conquered Syria. He came down the west coast of Israel, through Lebanon, down the west coast. He laid siege to the city of Tyre, which is, I guess, northern Israel or southern Lebanon or something to that effect, and made his way all the way down that coast. And that's what he was doing. He was just conquering and decimating. Now, the Samaritans saw an opportunity. Here is a big, mighty conqueror, and here's a way to get the Jews. So they sent delegations to speak with him, and they basically convinced Alexander that this Beis Hamikdash that the Jewish people use is, once again, where they're going to launch their revolution from, and they're not going to be willing to go under the rulership of Alexander. They're going to fight. Having said that, Alexander had a plan, and his plan was that he was going to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Now, part of it was also, there was more to it. You see, two things happened. Number one, when he got to the city of Tyre, he laid siege to the city of Tyre, and then he sent word to Yerushalayim, I need your help. I need you to send me troops, and I need you to send me supplies, and reinforcements of all types. And they did not. Secondly, he said, since I am now coming into this region and I'm taking over, he demanded that Israel pay their tax, not to Persia, but to him. He said, it comes my way. Shimon HaTzadik, the leader of the Jewish people, the Kohen Gadol, said, no, we don't work that way. We have a loyalty to Persia, and we will continue to pay the tax and the tribute to Persia. All of those things combined, especially with the urging of the Samaritans, he made a decision that he's going to come from the west coast. I don't know if he'd already gotten all the way down to where Gaza is today, or what was called Aza back then, but basically, he decided he's going to come across, he's going to conquer Yerushalayim, destroy the Beis Hamikdash, massacre the Jewish people and exile them. And that was the plan. When he made his journey toward there, with the invading forces, and again, he had invaded so many other countries and conquered successfully, there was unbelievable fear and trepidation going on in Israel and in Yerushalayim. This is it. We just finally got back, and here we go again, the Babylonians, but worse. And it was decided that Shimon HaTzadik was going to go out to meet him, and he took with him an entourage of kohanim and leaders. He decided that to go out to meet him, he is going to adorn himself with the Bigdei Kahuna. Now, there are different opinions as to which Bigdei Kahuna he put on. Some say he specifically put on the white clothing because he couldn't put on all of the 8 garments. Others say, no, in this situation, he was able to put on the other 8 garments, if I'm not mistaken, because it was going to be... I haven't looked over this Gemara in years. I probably should have looked it up before, but I kind of ran out of time. But he was allowed to put them on. There's even another opinion that he made another set of Bigdei Kahuna just for this purpose. They weren't with the same Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash, but they had the right look. Whatever it was, certainly he put on Bigdei Kahuna, and he went with his entourage to meet up with Alexander. And as the invading forces were coming upon Yerushalayim, they were met with the delegation of the Jewish people there to meet him. As soon as he got close, Alexander dismounted from the horse that he was riding, came over to him, bowed down, and started bowing down to him. Okay? He basically started bowing down to Shimon HaTzadik. His generals, who were all excited about yet the next invasion and the next conquest, especially with all they had heard from the Samaritans, said, "What are you doing? What are you bowing to this guy for? He is the leader of the people that were coming to conquer. He's the leader of the people that were coming to destroy and to massacre and to exile. Why are you bowing down?" To which he said, "I don't know who he is. Here's what I know. That whenever," and there are different versions of this, but basically is whenever I go into battle, before I go into battle, I always see a vision of that man with that white beard wearing those clothing, and he's always promising me and blessing me with victory. So whoever he is, he's my guy. And we will not be conquering him. On the contrary, to him I bow." When this happened, there was a tremendous sigh of relief amongst the Jewish people that they were not going to, God forbid, be going through another terrible tragedy that they had gone through with the Babylonians. And if you think this through, it wasn't that much before. Think about it. Jerusalem was conquered. Beis HaMikdash was destroyed in 33-38, right? Where are we now? We're about the year 34-48. It's about 110 years, okay? It's not that long ago. So, thank God. Then they decided that they were going to, he wanted to come to Yerushalayim and he wanted to see what the Jewish people are all about. They showed him the Beis HaMikdash and they walked him all around the Beis HaMikdash and all the different things and showed him the Avodah, and he was immensely impressed with the deep spirituality of the Jewish people and everything that was the Avodah and everything that was the Beis HaMikdash. And he said, "I like this so much, I have the perfect idea. You know what would be perfect in this Beis HaMikdash? An image of me. What we should do is we should build an image, maybe instead of stone or of marble, and we should place that in the Beis HaMikdash. It'll be such a perfect tribute, showing my support for the Beis HaMikdash and how much it means to me being the emperor and all." No. Shimon HaTzadik explained that perhaps that wasn't the best way of honoring him and paying tribute to him, and explained that they cannot, no, he was direct with him. There cannot be an image of a person in this Beis HaMikdash. And he came up with another plan. He said that will give you much greater honor. The first one was that all male Kohanim that are born this year, he said, will be named Alexander. There's some who say every male born Bechlal in all of Israel or all of Yerushalayim, but certainly all male Kohanim will be named Alexander. To this day, the name Alexander is still a Jewish name. If you ever wonder how did Alexander the Great from Macedonia become a Jewish name, that's how. Because they honored him with that instead of building the image of the Beis HaMikdash. The second thing that they did was they said, we're going to start a new series of dates right here in Yerushalayim, a new calendar. And this new calendar will be based on your rulership. You know, in general, they always would, you know, when we read the Megillah, right? Bishnas Shalosh L'Malchai. It was in the 3rd year of the king's reign. That's how you do it, okay? So they said, we're going to honor you, and we're going to start a new calendar, even though we have our Jewish calendar from creation. We're going to create a new calendar when it comes to business. And all contracts are going to follow this date, the date from when it is that you became king. And this is what's known as the Minyan Shtaros, the number of the contracts. That calendar lasted well over 1,000 years. They continued to use the dating of that calendar for over 1,000 years. So in fact, it really was a great honor and tribute to Alexander the Great. The Samaritans didn't give up. Okay? The Kusim, they're trying to convince Alexander the Great, no, that's not the real Beis HaMikdash. come see ours. Ours is the real Beis Hamikdash. He was unbelievably impressed with the real Beis Hamikdash. He was unbelievably impressed with the Avaida. So he said, you know what I would like to do? I think there should be a debate. Let there be a debate between the Samaritans and the Jewish people so that we can really see who's who and what's what. And in fact, he commissioned a debate, and it happened. And when it came to talking about worship of God and Torah and all other things, they didn't hold a candle to the great leaders of the Jewish people, and they were completely humiliated. And from that point forward, they were relegated to very much second-class citizens, not very much in the favor of the ruler, Alexander the Great. With this, now, mind you, he's a good guy, but they have taken over the rulership of Israel. His troops are there. The Persian troops are in no way ready, able, or willing to fight. And Israel officially now falls under Greek rule, and the Persian Empire at this point pretty much came to an end and pretty much collapsed. And now we're left only with the Greeks, who are in control of Israel. Under Alexander, the Greeks' control of Israel under Alexander was actually a tremendously peaceful time and a very, very good time for the Jewish people. Just a second. First of all, he allowed them to keep all of their customs, all of their laws. It wasn't uncommon that a new king comes in, he starts telling you how to live your life. You can't learn Torah, you can't do this, no. Anything they wanted, all of their Avodas Hashem, all perfect, no problem. He did now insist that the tax that they were paying to the Persian Empire, they pay to him, and at this point now they agreed to do so, and they started paying this tax to the Greeks. However, he said that during the Shemitah year, you don't pay tax. You're not working, you're not farming the land, you're not harvesting, you don't have to pay tax, which is a tremendous thing. He's so acknowledging of Jewish law and restriction and limitation that he's altering the laws for them to help accommodate. Jews did have to serve in the military, but they were freed from active duty on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Tremendous. Now, while the rest of the world was becoming completely enamored by Alexander and the Greek culture, because as he came into each place, he was bringing Greek culture into all of these places that he had conquered, as I mentioned, the areas of Turkey and Syria and all over the place. He ended up going down and going through Egypt, and it was a tremendous, the great empire of Alexander the Great. He wasn't called Alexander the Pretty Good. It's Alexander the Great for a reason. So, all of these places, he brought with him the Greek culture. The Greek culture was tremendous. It was him and his good buddy Aristotle, right? And they had a lot to offer in philosophy, in math, in science. They were the leaders by far when it came to intelligence and academics and all things, not to mention their culture, art, sports, the Olympics, everything. It was so far ahead, it was light years ahead of the simple pagan. I mean, not that they weren't pagan, they were also pagan technically with all the gods that they did, but compared to these uncivilized, so to speak, third world nations that they were conquering, this was civilization, this was something new, and everybody was just going crazy over it. They loved all of this new progressive stuff. At that point in Israel, the fact is, they were free to study Torah, they were free to have a Beis HaMikdash, to have Avodah, to have Shalosh Regalim, for everyone to worship Hashem the way they worship Hashem properly. And this allowed them to remain strong in their faith and not to give in to the ideology and ideas of the Greek culture. Baruch Hashem. Alexander was a big believer in glory and religions and whatever. And so Alexander decided, you know what, there's this other temple that was destroyed, the Temple of Baal. Let's rebuild the Temple of Baal. And he decided to rebuild the Temple of Baal. There were many, many Jewish soldiers within his troops, and they were commanded to get involved and to go help rebuild the Temple of Baal. They refused. They said, we're not going to do it. We're not going to get involved. We're not building a temple to Avodah Zarah. We won't do it. And when this happened, their superiors punished them. They threatened them terribly. But when word got back, and they still, no matter what they threatened them with, the Jewish people remained strong and said, we are not going to touch something that's idol worship. We won't do it. When word got back to Alexander, he pardoned them and said, no, this is the way they need to be, so be it, and he pardoned them. So ultimately we see that in spite of all of the difficulty and all of the outside influence coming in, Yiddishkeit is somehow remaining strong and true. And this is really a credit to the Anshe Knesset Agdala. The edicts that they put in, the takanos that they did, was such a strong foundation that it allowed Jews to remain loyal to Torah. So now we've finished Mishnah Beis in Pirkei Avos. Mishnah Gimel in Pirkei Avos begins with Antigonus ish Seichai kibel mishemen hatzadik, right? Antigonus from Seichai, he received from Shemen HaTzadik. When we say received, what the Pirkei Avos is really talking about is the handing down of the Masorah, of the tradition, and of the oral law of Torah Shabbal Peh. And each of these people were the leaders of the Jewish people, and they were required to see to it that not only the written law, but the Torah Shabbal Peh would be handed down in its accuracy and entirety to the next generation. Shemen HaTzadik was responsible, and he gave over to Antigonus ish Seichai, who, again, taught an entire generation of people. It's not like he did it on his own and said, trust me. He taught everyone. But he was responsible to make sure that they knew and that they kept. So, the interesting thing about Antigonus ish Seichai, so again, historically speaking, where are we now? We're in the year... Shemen HaTzadik died after 40 years. So in the year 3488, Shemen HaTzadik died. And that's when he was succeeded by Antigonus ish Seichai. What is Antigonus ish Seichai famous for? So for one thing, he's famous for his Mishnah, this very, very profound Mishnah.
Wait, so the year that he met Alexander the Great, that was his first year of being Kohen Gadol?
So it would seem. It seems that that's the first year.
How did Alexander go through so many wars seeing this man who wasn't Kagel yet?
All of his wars were happening around then. Again, we can go back and I'll look through Seder Hadaris. We can try and do the math. And there are probably different opinions as to what year that happened as well. But on this timeline, it has him meeting him in 3448. Having said that, oh no, by the way, no, Shemen HaTzadik became the leader of the Jewish people. Well, oh yeah, that's 40 years. That's 40 years of Kohen Gadol, correct. So, Antigonus ish Seichai's Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, what does he say? Al tiyu ka'avadim ha'misham shenasarav al manas l'kabel pras. It's a nice Shweki song, right? Al tiyu, right? So, don't be like those servants, meaning when we serve God, don't be like those servants who serve their master for a reward. Ela havu ka'avadim ha'misham shenasarav shalai al manas l'kabel pras. Be like those servants who serve their master, not for the reward. V'himer shamayim aleichem, let the fear of God be upon you. And it's a beautiful Mishnah. And in fact, when you talk to different Jews of different communities, and they're so stressing of schar v'einish, we serve God because of reward and punishment. You say, look at Antigonus ish Seichai. He says not that way. He says clearly, it can't end there. We have to have a deeper, more meaningful relationship with God. That's not just about reward and punishment. Having said that, there's something else that Antigonus ish Seichai is very, very famous for, and that is his two most famous students who vastly misunderstood and misconstrued that Mishnah. And they were Tzadok and Baitus. Tzadok and Baitus understood that Mishnah to mean that he's saying, don't serve God for the reward because there is no reward. Too bad, go serve God, and in the end you get nothing. There's no reward, there's no Elam Haba, that's it. That turned them. And they said, well, if that's what it is, then I don't really know about the way we're keeping stuff now because it's pretty difficult for no reward. So they ultimately went off the path. But it wasn't enough that they went off the path. They went off the path and they gathered a following. The more famous one was Tzadok, and his followers were known as the Tzedukim, the followers of Tzadok. In English or Greek or whatever the language is, they're known as the Sadducees. The Sadducees are very, very well known. Not only amongst us that we know the Tzdukim, but they're well known in the rest of the world. Certainly in the history of the world and in Christian history and theology, etc., the role played by the Sadducees and the Pharisees is actually opposite. In their world, the Pharisees are the bad guys. The Pharisees are the Perushim. The Perushim were the leaders of the Jewish people. They were called Perushim because they separated themselves. To one extent, they separated themselves from the rest of the world and from the secular world. And also, as I believe it discusses in Rambam, that when you talk about Tara, Tuma and Tara, right? The Rambam talks about Tuma and Tara, that there were those that would separate themselves always They would separate themselves from everything to always remain tahar. They wouldn't eat this, then they wouldn't eat that. That might be tummy. They wouldn't eat this house. They separated themselves from everyone and everything to always remain tahar, pure. But they're the good guys. They're the leader. All of the Tanaim and the rabbis that we'll mention in the Mishnah, Shimon ben Shattach and this one and that one, they're the good guys. They are the Prushim. The Sadducees were the ones who, following Tzaddik, in the end, the official doctrine that they adapted was, we only believe in Torah Shabbat. We only believe in the written law, and we don't believe in Torah Shabbal Peh. We don't believe in the oral law, which ultimately, immediately caused them to do bizarro things. One of the bizarro things was they would sit in the dark on Shabbos, because it says that you're not allowed to have light on Shabbos, right? You're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbos. So they would sit in the dark. We have Shabbos candles to have light on Shabbos, and part of that is to combat that which the Tzaddukim tried to make as Jewish law, when in fact it's the opposite of Jewish law.
If there's no reward, why keep anything?
Also, good question. They didn't keep all that much. And I'll answer your question. The nature of human beings need a core and a faith and a foundation. Everyone needs it. And everyone has one. Okay? Jews even more so. The secular Jew, the atheist secular Jew, you'll always find they've got a religion somewhere. It might be leftism, it might be liberalism, it might be environmentalism, but they've got something. And they don't get rewarded for it. They can create, the reward is in the goodness that I'm doing. So they created, on the one hand, part of what they were doing here was an excuse to live an easy secular life. In reality, throughout most of the generations, the Tzaddukim were just the typical secular Jew who's just not observant. They had a doctrine to hold on to. One of the reasons they had a doctrine is because everybody needs a doctrine. They said, oh, look at us. I'm religious. Look at me. I do this. I religiously don't turn on Shabbos. And a whole bunch of other stuff that they did. Maybe next week we'll make a list of all the weird things that the Tzaddukim used to do. Okay? There's another reason why they did it. Later on in history, probably, if I'm not mistaken, after the story of Hanukkah, there came a point in time when the religious and the Prussian were very much in power. And they were so much in power that they made it illegal to not keep Torah. And anyone who openly says, I don't believe in it, I don't keep Torah, they could be punished by death. So the Tzaddukim said, oh, we keep Torah, just Torah Shabbat. It was their loophole. Okay? That was their out. We keep Torah Shabbat. So that's part of it as well. It wasn't necessarily such a faith and religious doctrine either. It was, but it really also wasn't. Anyway, bottom line is their thing is that they keep only Torah Shabbat. They keep only the written law, not the oral law. And quite frankly, the Tzaddukim, the Sadducees, were at the center of just about every issue of difficulty and strife amongst the Jewish people throughout the time since their emergence until the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. It's they who brought about ultimately Herod becoming king, and it's they, because of their actions, Herod became king, and ultimately the Romans were able to take power, and ultimately the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash was because of their actions. Not a good thing. And this again is they came about from Antigonus Ish Seicher. Let's talk a little bit more about what's going on now over here in history. So we're in Mishnah 3, we're in Antigonus Ish Seicher. He's going to be followed by Mishnah Daled, Mishnah 4 of Yosei ben Yoezer and Yosei ben Yochanan. Yosei ben Yoezer from Treda, Yosei ben Yochanan from Yerushalayim. Alexander dies. Alexander was 33 years old when he died, so he accomplished a whole lot for a young guy. Now, when Alexander was in power, he ruled with an iron fist, and he was a powerhouse, and he had it all. When he died, he didn't have children, and the empire basically split, and it was his generals who inherited his kingdom. And the way it worked was each general took over a different area and claimed it as theirs. And the Greek Empire split into three. There was the original Greek Empire in the area of Greece, Macedonia, etc. There was the Syrian Empire, which ultimately became ruled by Seleucus. And then there was the area of Egypt and Israel. And Egypt and Israel fell under the rulership of Talmai, the first Talmai. There were many, many Talmais. After the pharaohs finished, they came up with Talmais. They like the letter P. I was wondering, by the way, today, just hit me today, why is it, Paro, right? It says, the original language is Hebrew, it's Paro. Who came up with Pharaoh? Why couldn't they just call him Paro? Just wondering, I don't know. Anyway, one day we'll have to find out why they insisted on coming up with another language. Not another language, but fine, it's another language. But even if I don't speak your language, your name is still your name, right? Why do I need you to have a name in my language? And what makes that a name in my language? Because that name doesn't exist in my language. Okay, this is what bothers me when I drive.
Why does Talmud have a P?
And why does Talmud have a P? Very good question. So, Talmud was the ruler of Egypt. The Jewish people were living in, many of them, again, we're talking about the Jews in Israel. They're not only living in Israel. So for starters, many Jews never, how many Jews came back? 42,000 came back, right? Originally with Zerubbabel. Another 1,500 came back. How many more? I don't know. Some back, some forth. The majority of the Jewish people are not living in Israel. Yes, there's Israel. There's a Beis HaMikdash. There's tremendous, it's amazing. There's rulership under a Kohen Gadol. It's fantastic. The Jews living a Jewish lifestyle, Beis HaMikdash, Regolim, Mizbeach, Menorahs. It's incredible. But there's also a whole life going on outside of Israel. It's going on in Babylonia. Not only in Babylonia, but in Egypt. Jews were living in Egypt from the first exile. Basically, they went to Babel, and then many Jews immediately ended up going into Egypt. And under Persian rule, they ended up in Egypt. Now, under Talmai, so first of all, let's talk about Israel before we get into Egypt. Under Talmai, in Israel, the Kohen Gadol was given power. So just like Shimon HaTzadik had power under Greece, Talmai said, you know what? Kohen Gadol, you are the governor. You will be the governor of Israel. The Sanhedrin was given complete power over justice. So much power that they were also given the power to overrule the Kohen Gadol. If there was a situation which involved Jewish law and there was a question on the Kohen Gadol, Sanhedrin had the power to do so. And the Sanhedrin, the governor, and by and large, the Jewish people in Israel under Talmai were completely autonomous. They were not independent, but they were autonomous. They had self-rulership. At this time, Jews were living not only there was already Jews living in Greece, there were Jews living in Turkey at this time already, and there was a huge community in Egypt. And since the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, Jews had already settled in Egypt. Under Persian rule, the Jews had formed a military colony in the city of Elephantine. And this was a military outpost for the Persian Empire way out there in Egypt. And it was manned by Jews. The Jews there built ships, they engaged in business, and they had everything they needed. Jewish soldiers were ordered by the Persian government to keep Jewish law. They were ordered to keep Jewish law because the Persian government believed that as long as the Jews are keeping Jewish law, they're blessed. And if these are the guys who are in our military outpost, we'll do just fine as long as they have God on their side and they're blessed. So it became the law. I always laughed during COVID. We had a situation where schools were closed. You're not allowed to have a school, right? But there was a lawsuit, and you can't close down a religious school. So they made a rule that religious institutions were allowed to have religious education. So what do you have? You had the opposite story of Hanukkah. You had in Cheder, for example, they were allowed Valley Torah. Valley Torah learned, the kids came to school every day for Judaic, then they sent them home, and they would do English on Zoom. In Cheder, officially, they were only coming there to learn Judaic. So I was always laughing. Can you imagine, one day the inspectors come or the police come by, and they're saying, quick, hide the math books, pull out the Chumash, okay? You had the government telling you must learn Torah. But this was even more so. The government was literally telling them, be a good Jew, we need you to be a good Jew. I'll tell you another story about that. A guy that I knew him since he was a kid in Hebrew school and our teen program. Certain things happened, and the DA in San Bernardino went after him for something, and he ended up in jail in San Bernardino. Rather than prosecuting him, they just let him languish in county jail. Normally, there's a court case. You win, you lose, you serve time, you don't serve time. He was just languishing in county jail over there in San Bernardino, which apparently, I actually went to visit him a couple of times, not a good place. Not a lot of Jews there. It's not like going to, what's it called, Otisville? It's not that. Not a lot of Jews there. white supremacists, there's Latino gangs, African American gangs. It's a bad situation there, and there's a lot of Jew hatred there, and he's stuck there. Being there, seeing, he was living, he was making a lot of money. He was living a really fast lifestyle, crazy expensive cars, spending ridiculous amounts of money, just living the high life. And then it all came crashing down. And when it came crashing down, he was about 24 at the time. He'd already been living the high life. Condos in Florida, he had it all. And he realized that he needs more. And he somehow, he got a Tanya, I got him a Siddur, I got him Tefillin, and slowly but surely he started to daven every day. He learned Tanya every day, he davened every day, and he davened every day, and he spent a long time davening every day. And this is going on for months and months and months. He said one day he woke up and he said, I've had it, I can't do it anymore. I tried. He let his beard grow. He was like, really? He said, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I can't. And he's sitting there and he's not davening. And a little later into the day, one of the gang members comes over to him and says, you didn't pray today. He says, no. He said, why didn't you pray today? He said, I can't do it anymore. He says, what are you talking about? He says, I can't. He says, you need to. We need you to. We're counting on you. We all look to you for inspiration. When you pray, we know it's okay. You get in there now and you get that book. And he took him by the hand and he pushed him and he said, and he forced me. I went to visit him. He told me the story. It was unbelievable. Later, when there was a race riot in the prison, and he's this poor guy stuck in the middle of a race riot. They're killing each other, literally. Members of each race was running to go and find out where he was so that they could save him. They wanted to make sure that he was safe. White supremacists want to keep him safe. Everybody wanted him safe. Anyway, it's just very interesting. We need you, they said. So the Persians said to him, the Persians said to the Jews, we need you. Keep Yiddishkeit. And so they did. Jewish soldiers were freed on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Not in the Israeli army like was going on, at least in Israel. This was happening in Egypt. And again, that was even under Persian rule. There was a government agency established in Elephantine to make sure that Jews were taken care of. It was I don't know if you know this, today in LAPD has an official, they have an office of, what's it called? Diversity. Okay, they have an office of whatever it is, it's an office of community relations. In the office of community relations, they have officially a Jewish liaison. He's a Jewish liaison. He's a Shomer Shabbos guy, a very, very nice guy. And his job is to see to it that LAPD is properly serving the Jewish community. And God forbid, when there's a situation, we're supposed to reach out to him. He's trying to look out for us. For all that LAPD can possibly do with the 11 officers that they have in the entire Los Angeles with no support from the government or the DA. But they had a government agency that's job was to see to the needs of the Jewish people and take care of them, and to make sure that they're not disturbed by the rest of the Egyptian population. It happened once that a group of Egyptian priests instigated a full-on riot and pogrom against the Jews. And they came in and they set fire to the Jewish shul. The government stepped in, the Persian government, this is still before Alexander, okay? The Persian government, we took a step back for a minute just to talk about the origins of the Jews in Egypt. The Persian government came in, they forced those very same Egyptians to go back in there and to rebuild the shul and to make sure it's more beautiful than it was before you burnt it down, and they had to do it at their own expense. Now, then came Alexander. We know that life in general in Alexander was good. Alexander is dead now, and Talmai is not only running Israel, he's obviously running Egypt. He's the Egyptian king. He also treated the Jews very well. And the community developed and grew. There was a community we're going to finish in about 5 minutes. The Jewish community in Alexandria became a center for world trade. You bring the Jews in, and here you go, right? And they built a shul in Alexandria, which was the largest, most magnificent shul ever built. The saying goes, he who never saw the shul in Alexandria never saw a beautiful shul. I never looked into it, but I know that the Rambam lived in Alexandria. And I believe he lived in Alexandria, and I think he may have, I don't know if it was actually the same shul, but he was like the Rav of the community there. Obviously, you're talking about many years later. That's 400, it's quite a few hundred years later, if not 1,000. Anyway, so this shul was so big that you couldn't hear. The guy is davening in the front, too far back, you couldn't hear. They had a guy who sat in the middle. They built this big, beautiful marble platform, and they had a guy who was called the Maturgaman. He was the translator, so to speak. And then there was another guy with a lag who would wave when they got up to the next thing, and this guy would announce where they're up to and would say things out loud so that everybody could know where the chazan was up to in front. That's how big the shul was. Doesn't sound so practical. Maybe they should have had a page number thing. The paginator like we have in the front, the shul. The reason they didn't have one of those is because they didn't have Siddurim yet, because the Siddur hadn't yet been invented. Davening was done only by heart. There was no such thing as written prayers. Siddur wasn't invented until the first Siddur written was
But it was set. The Siddur was set. It just wasn't
prayers were set, but they had to be done by heart. The idea of reading a prayer, it's like, can you imagine a president gets up and instead of speaking, he only reads off a teleprompter?
Imagine.
Oh, sorry.
Last week you said the prayer count during the Ezra time, right?
They established the majority of the prayers
He was a Sufi. How come he didn't write it down?
because specifically prayers needed to come from the heart. It was inappropriate to be reading a prayer off a piece of paper. It was considered to be a lack of sincerity. And it was only in the times really of the Gaonim. I think it was Rav Sadia Gaon who maybe wrote the first Siddur. So
what is in the prayer that they have to remember?
Shemona Esrei,
Yeah, okay, that I know.
Shema.
That's it.
By then, what? Hayom Yom they were saying, sure. Shir Shal Yom Levium were saying, they were probably saying.
The origin of the express.
Not obstacles.
Not all, but parts. When we learn the yeah, there are many parts that were already being said. Again, the idea of whoever says Ashrei this many times, they were probably already saying those parts of Tehillim. In other words, Ashrei and the Hallelujahs, they were probably saying back then already. It became more official later, but anyway.
But most of people did not know how to learn this. So
No, they did. The people then knew how to say these things by heart. Eventually, they didn't, which is why they started writing Siddurim.
That leads the davening.
Right, there came a point in time where that's why they started with Chazaras Hashatz, the repetition of the Amidah, because you had people who didn't know how to say the Amidah. They couldn't say the Shemona Esrei, someone said it out loud, they answered Amen. Yeah, eventually, as it got to that, there came a point in time where they said, better we should write it down, and at least it should be said. The same way there was a point in time where Yehuda Nasi said, better we should write down the Mishnah and the Torah Shabbat Peh, or it won't exist at all. Yes, it's supposed to be Baal Peh, but now it's going to become non-existence. Sakanas nefashos. Wow. Thank you for that extra sound effect with the word sakanas nefashos. I was listening.
You have to make up
Okay. So anyway, just to finish off over here. They had in this shul a separate section. They make jokes about this now. Where would you like to sit? Would you like to sit with the architects? Would you like to sit with the real estate people? They had a different section for every trade. And people sat with people in similar businesses so that they would feel comfortable and that they would have, a feeling of community and camaraderie.
Keep eyes on your competition.
That too. Back to the famous Nishabasgard story, right? Didn't we tell that last week?
I believe we did.
I think we're supposed to tell it every week. Now, the one thing is, though, as the Jews were living there in great peace and harmony with and business, and they were strong in their Yiddishkeit, they did allow secularism to come in. They got into Greek philosophy and Greek culture because they wanted to know what's going on around them. Now that they weren't going to allow it to stop them from keeping Shabbos per se, they just want to be involved in it. That's only the beginning, however. Ultimately, that is what leads to the Hellenism. There were Jewish philosophers who would combine concepts in Torah with concepts in Greek culture. And in the end, this did lead people astray in Egypt. And in the end, all of this Greek influence within the Egyptian Jewish community had its effect on the community in Israel as well. We'll stop here, and next week we'll get into the Septuagint. That's the translation of the Torah into 72 languages. And from there, that's going to propel us into the next few generations within Pirkei Avos and into the beginnings of the difficulties and corruption within the Kohen Gadol and the politics and the strife and a lot of difficulty over the next many tens of years, leading eventually up to the Greek rule and the story of Hanukkah and beyond. So once again, Sei L'chaim L'vracha, And my mother-in-law's Neshama Shalom Aliyah.
Amen.
Pal Digi Shabbos Avram Yitzchak. Chaim Levrach.
Amen.